My name's Jaqui Devereux and I'm the Director of the Community Media Association. The CMA is the umbrella body for community media in the UK, the best known part of which is the licensed community radio sector, but there are also community filmmakers, community television, community-based media projects that just use the internet for dissemination. So it's not the platform, it's how the media is made that's most important. We are recognised by the government as being the advocacy body for community media and community radio.
With the radio sector, have you, off the top of your head, got any kind of facts and figures, number of stations, or how widespread it is throughout the UK?
I think there's 228 stations that are licensed, of which about 180 are on air across the UK. Obviously there's about 10 to 12 in Northern Ireland, about 20 in Scotland, 15 in Wales, the rest are actually in England, but spread throughout the cities and rural communities as well, so all across the UK.
Do you have a figure of how many people are involved, like individually, or is that difficult?
Well, they say just for the licensed sector there's an average of 100 volunteers at each station at any one time, so we're talking like 20,000 odd people every day working in community radio.
What about the variety of stations? Are they quite specific in terms of what they, who they broadcast to and what their output is?
I think it varies a great deal. Some are very specifically targeted at particular parts of the community, so for instance Desi Radio broadcasts to the Punjabi community and most of its broadcasting is in Punjabi. Some of them are much more widespread, so they just broadcast to the community they're in. All the stations though, even if they've got a particular target community, whether that's young people or BME community, their mission is really to encourage cross-sectoral, cross-cultural dialogue. So it's not just about the target community, it's about saying this is our target community, but hey, how can you get involved as well? How can you find out what your Bangladeshi neighbour is doing? So it's very much about moving out from the target community to the wider community.
And have you got any examples of particularly successful community radio stations?
I think it's very hard to pick one out. We obviously, as a member association, we support all our members no matter what they're doing. Obviously the ones that were the Access pilots back in 2001, they've been going a very long time, some of them more than 20 years in fact, and they tend to be the most successful and probably with the most stations and with the stations with the most money because they're well established community groups essentially, and that's the way to think of it, as a community group that does radio as opposed to a radio station that does community.
What was that? You mentioned the Access.
Community radio's been around for a long time in the UK, and it came out of the, I don't know if you remember ham radio, where people did it out of their back bedrooms. My uncle did that in fact. There's been a lot of campaigning on behalf of the sector by the CMA and others, and in 2001 the previous Labour government decided it would create a few pilot stations to see how community radio might work. There were 15 stations and they were very successful in the number of volunteers and the kind of social benefit they created, and that actually led directly to the Community Radio Order as part of the Communications Act 2003. The Community Radio Order enabled the licensing of full-time community radio stations in the UK. I think at the time the government thought there would probably be about 50. We're over 200. By the end of next year it's likely to be 300, so it's been very, very successful.
What is the real purpose of community radio?
Well, we believe the real purpose of community radio is to engage people in the local community, and it's very much about community engagement. It's about bringing people together, it's about encouraging volunteering, and many of the volunteers in community radio are people who wouldn't go through the traditional routes, so the local voluntary action or CBS, they wouldn't consider themselves as volunteer material. And there's some very successful volunteers in community radio, both in terms of changing their own lives but also changing other lives. So some people have gone on to work in the BBC and are quite famous. There was a person who was an agoraphobic in Manchester who eventually was persuaded to volunteer on Withershore FM, ended up writing a soap for it for 4 years. So very much community radio changes lives, but that's about the engagement of people as opposed to, obviously the radio output is important and the quality is important. I'm not minimising that, but it's actually about getting the people in the first place.
Just kind of expanding on that, what service does it provide for people, obviously the people involved, but also for people listening who aren't involved?
We estimate that currently community radio reaches around 18 million of the population in the UK, that's in total, and every survey shows that about 10% of the potential listenership does listen to community radio. So we've got 1.8 million people in the UK listening to community radio on a daily basis. Many of those listen to community radio because it gives them something different that they don't get from the BBC, and they certainly don't get from commercial radio, and that's about localism. It's about people speaking in their own languages. Community radio is unique in that it broadcasts in obviously a variety of community languages, both BME languages, so from the Asian subcontinent, but also other European languages. Depends who's living in your community. And so it gives them something that's much more local, and it really comes to the fore at things like floods or national disasters, because it's there saying what's happening on your doorstep as opposed to what might be happening 100 miles away. And I think it's that very localness. People want local as well as international and national.